All right, good morning, directors. So I'll just call the meeting to order and just acknowledge, as we always do, that we're meeting today on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, and that the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service Area includes the Coast Salish, Wakwaka'wakw, and Nuu-chah-nulth territories. And I'll ask first for a motion to approve the agenda. Second. Any comments? Okay, anyone opposed to accepting the agenda as is? Okay, and that passes. And then we have an in-camera recommendation, if someone would like to move that. Okay, thanks, Robin, and seconded by Director Morin. Okay, anyone opposed to going in camera? And that passes. Next, we're on to adoption of minutes. This is for May 16th. Did I get it? Thanks. Okay, moved and seconded. Any comments? All right, any opposed? Great, okay, and that passes. And the next item is an update on Indigenous relations, and I'll pass that over to our CA. Oh, sorry, on to my apologies, I'm jumping too fast. We're on to reports, and this is the technical memos on facility licensing, waste hauler licensing, and mandatory source separation. And I'll hand that over to our CA.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the board. We have an exciting agenda here in front of us today. There's a couple of very important topics to cover off, and first introduce Vivian Shaw, our Senior Manager of CSWM Services, Comox Strathcona Waste Management Services. And Vivian will be introducing Larry Gardner, and I think just introducing this presentation for the tech memos overall. So Vivian, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, James. Through the CEO to the chair and the CSWM board, thank you. I'm here to introduce Larry Gardner today. Just before his retirement from the Regional District of Nanaimo, where he served as their manager of solid waste, with a remarkable career spanning over 3 decades, including 28 years as a provincial regulator with the Ministry of Environment. Larry's contributions have really shaped the landscape of environmental stewardship here in BC. Despite stepping away from full-time work, Larry remains deeply committed to his passion for sustainable practice and environmental advocacy. As we had noted throughout this solid waste management process, we have to make changes in order to continue to move the needle on our waste diversion efforts. And to that end, we're really fortunate to be collaborating with Larry on critical initiatives we're looking to aim to explore at making a marked difference in our waste management strategies. To date, we have presented 3 technical memos related to repair cafes, free stores, and community outreach, which speaks to more the circular economy, the sustainability, education, and the social aspects. These next 3 set of memos, then today's discussion really revolves around waste facility licensing, waste hauler licensing, and mandatory source separation regulations. The latter 2 are innovative measures conceptualized during Larry's tenure at the RDN, and it has the potential to reshape how waste is managed, particularly in the industrial, commercial, and institutional space, where there are significant gains to be made. So with that, I would just want to introduce Larry. He's here to share his insights, experience, and perspective on how these 3 strategies has and are anticipated to provide a vision of sustainable solutions that can potentially usher us into a new era of waste management practices.
Thank you, Vivian. I'm really pleased to be able to come and speak to you about waste. As Vivian said, I've spent a lot of my career dealing with solid waste. I dealt with the first waste management plan in the province, as well as several throughout the province with their first rendition. So again, a pleasure to come, and just want to talk about some of the regulatory tools that you might want to consider or at least look at that may be appropriate to assist with getting higher levels of diversion. So just a presentation outline. I'll give a few crib notes on regional districts. This was a presentation that I gave previously to your advisory committee. So much of that you'll know, it's just one slide, but it was really for their benefit so that your committee would understand some of the limitations on what regional districts can do. Then I'll talk about waste facility licensing, waste generator source separation, waste hauler licensing, and a wrap up. But just a few perspectives. These are my perspectives from almost 40 years in dealing with solid waste. Diversion costs more than disposal. If you want cheap, landfill. Society will continue to rely on disposable products. I really believe the time frame where you could expect a TV to last 20 years is long gone. There's probably still TVs around, from the old days that still work, but nobody watches them and nobody wants them. So even if products could be made durable to last a long time, I think the needs of society has changed a lot that we're going to continue to see disposable products. Increasing diversion is good for the economy. So if you consider, and let's just take a simple one like beverage containers. And for those that don't know, the deposit refund, BC was the first in North America to introduce a deposit refund system. And the whole purpose of that deposit refund was to keep people from throwing containers out their windows in their cars, so that they would take them back to a store so a store could send them to a landfill. It had nothing to do with diversion. But if you think about it, that transition has changed where we have a whole industry around collecting those, processing them, and turning them into new products. It does come with a higher cost, but it's created a whole bunch of jobs, more GDP, good for our economy. It generates wealth. So increasing diversion is good for the economy. Industry delivered services contribute more to the economy than government delivered services. Even government delivered services contribute to GDP, but it's actually in the order of half as efficient. So we get far better economy out of privately delivered services as compared to industry delivered services. And the role of government, and again, these are my perspectives, but the role of government is with waste management is to facilitate systems that get end-of-life products back into the material stream. It doesn't mean government needs to do all those tasks. It's really about building systems. And that's what this presentation is about, of how you might consider building systems to get higher diversion and get the benefits of that. So a few crib notes on regional districts. You'll know this, but regional districts are creatures of the province. They can only do what the province allows. So for an example, many people would like to see local government regulate the sale of products, eliminate single-use products and those sorts of things. Local government can't do it because the province doesn't give local government that power. Regional districts have the right to choose. So there are only two things that regional districts must do. They must do solid waste management planning and they must do emergency management. Those are the only things that are required of regional districts. An approved solid waste management plan can provide additional authorities that a regional district would not naturally have. So that's licensing of private facilities, and that's a lot about what this presentation is about. So the only way if you can access these additional authorities is to include them in your solid waste management plan. So the first, you could consider licensing waste facilities. When I talk about waste facilities, landfills, transfer station, composting operations, those sorts of things. It's not uncommon to see problems or concerns or nuisance with waste management facilities. I just pulled a couple of examples that are that are somewhat recent, odor complaints down in Cowichan, rat problems at another facility. And the larger one, that's an illegal waste dumping out in Chilliwack. That's started last summer. They dropped about 14,000 tons of waste on farmland. People complained about it in the summer. The province responded to it in, I think it was November, several months later. Finally, the Agricultural Land Reserve issued an order to remove the material, and it was May 31st deadline, which the company did not meet. So why might you want to consider licensing is to avoid some of the problems that may exist with waste management facilities. So to do that, again, it's something you would need to include in your solid waste management plan. And there's 3 examples of communities that have it: Metro Vancouver, Cowichan Valley Regional District, and Regional District in Nanaimo. They've all been licensing private facilities for more than 20 years. They all have the same objective. They all do it a little bit differently, but they all have the objective of mitigating nuisance and environmental impact, setting high standards of operation. They all impose financial security. I don't believe there's a case where any of them have actually used the financial security, but it's a very effective way to get good actors and excluding bad actors from operating in your community. And as well, it includes reporting to track waste volumes. So you can't manage what you can't measure. So by getting that information, it allows those regional districts to make better decisions and build systems to get higher diversion. So in terms of resource demand for the 3 areas, Metro has 8 staff for about 40 licenses, Cowichan 1 staff for 3 licensed facilities, in the RD about 1/3 of a staff for 14 licenses. Fair bit of discrepancy, and I'll touch on why that is shortly. So they typically all regulate the common facilities: disposal facilities, landfills, transfer station, material recovery facilities, mixed waste facilities, refuse-derived fuel storage facilities, basically all the people managing, kind of the traditional waste that we think about. They do have different definitions for the facilities, but in essence, they all capture the same. Then each of the regional districts exempt facilities as well. I'll just touch on a couple of them where the RDN is different, but you can see the RDN exempts more facilities than any of the others. It also reduces the number of licenses and the workload. For example, Nanaimo exempts facilities that are regulated by that have a site-specific authorization from the province. So that would typically be things like landfills or large composting operations. The concept is to not duplicate regulatory, oversight and red tape. If the province is managing it, the RDN feels there's no need for local government to be there. A couple of the other differences are like an asphalt plant that's reprocessing asphalt as ancillary to their core business of manufacture wouldn't require a license, whereas somebody that's just exclusively taking waste asphalt and crushing it would require a license. So just a few slight differences. Are there options to replace licensing? So could you deal with the nuisance without going this licensing route? The short answer is no. Local government does have some ability to put like unsightly premises bylaws, but you really wouldn't be able to deal with or be proactive in mitigating, some of the odor nuisance. The Chilliwack example where you're seeing large amounts of waste hauled onto a property that's inappropriate. Local government there really has no option, no ability to stop that or prevent it. Whereas if they had licensing, they could act immediately. And I don't think the problem would have ever grown to what it has to this point. As far as the reporting component, You could just voluntarily ask for the information. Fairly low cost to set up and, annual cost to manage that. So you would get some of the information that would be helpful to make decisions around waste management. But I'd suggest through a voluntary program, you may not actually get the data, and you might question the reliability of it because there's really no requirement to, or anything compelling the submission of that or the quality of the data. So if you were to consider licensing of facilities, and this is just facilities we're talking about right now, there's a number of different ways you could look at it. You could license all facilities, like the legislation would allow, subject to approval in your solid waste management plan, you to regulate every facility dealing with waste. So, that would include things like depots, thrift shops. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Demex, but you may as well in your area have used construction material. Demex is in Parksville. That's basically what they do. They sell used construction material. The RDN had no interest in regulating those types of facilities, but if that was desired, the legislation would allow it. Probably cost you about $80,000 to set it up and a couple of $100,000 a year annually to mitigate to regulate. Keep in mind the annual costs that I put here, they're kind of a moderate level of regulatory oversight. As you increase your regulatory oversight, and you saw quite a difference between Metro, Cowich, and the RDN, of course, those costs grow. You could as well exempt a bunch of facilities like the 3 examples have. And that would lower your administration costs because there's less facilities. So about the same cost to set up, and that's putting all the legislation in place, getting the approvals, putting the bylaws and the process in place. And then to administer, it'd probably be somewhere between $20,000 to $100,000 annually. And again, it depends on the level of oversight, minimum level of oversight, minimum cost. It is possible the legislation would allow through licensing to set diversion targets. Are we good?
I can't see the slides.
No. Okay.
It, but now Miss Director Kirk can, so I'm not sure what the difficulty is. Well, Director Kerr says he can see it. Director Chapman says he cannot.
Okay. Problem on his, yeah, the feed is I guess you could try leaving and then re-entering, like that might be the best thing. Kind of turn it on, turn it off. Okay. All right. Thanks for letting us know, Director Sinet. So perhaps we'll give him a minute to do that, and then we can all right, Director Chapman, if you can hear us, staff are going to send you a PDF of the entire presentation. So hopefully that helps. And hopefully, if you're back on in the Zoom, hopefully you're able to see it at this point. All right, but anyway, thanks for everyone taking a minute to address that. And if you want to hit your button, then I can get your microphone back on. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So kind of the last option with the licensing would be to include diversion targets in the requirements for a license. The legislation would allow you to do that. It's definitely possible. So you could actually compel those that are receiving waste to actually hit some kind of diversion target. It would definitely be a challenge to enforce. So it would probably be to set up a couple of $100,000 to set up, and then something in the order of, $400,000 annually to enforce. And it's really because of the amount of staff time that would have to inspect facilities to ensure that people are actually meeting that diversion, makes it a fairly significant cost. Neither of the three regional districts that are licensing facilities currently set diversion targets. They do set limitations on the amount of waste and the types of waste, because that's associated with controls, operational controls they might put in place. There's much difference between composting garden yard waste and composting food waste. So it may impact additional controls in terms of the, total amount of waste. The more that you accept, the more likely there's a higher risk of nuisance and problems. So it's really more tied to making sure operational controls are in place. The limitations are definitely not intended to restrict the growth of business. It's really more to make sure as they grow, they adopt additional operational controls so that they don't cause nuisance. But again, it would be possible to set diversion targets. There we are. That's a piece on waste facility licensing. And if anybody has any burning questions, I'm happy to field them now, and then we can continue on.
Yeah, thanks very much. So any questions on facility licensing before we move on to further reports? Okay, I see Director Tarian.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Larry. Just how are we licensing facilities now? Is it just a simple business license?
No, in the three regional districts that have licensing, there is an application process. You apply largely in the RDN, and there is a fee. It's a minor fee for processing the license. You would apply, and a lot of the way the RDN's tackled it, it has to be accompanied with an operations plan. And basically the operations plan details all of the pieces in place to mitigate environmental impact or nuisance. So for example, if there is, a risk of groundwater impact, they'll detail how they're going to be managing that. So it's really up to the proponent to put that package together, and then if it's satisfactory, it's approved, and they're issued a formal license with conditions. Conditions might be things like annual reporting, the amount of their financial security, those types of things.
Okay, thank you. My question is more, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, what are we doing here in the CVRD Strathcona region currently with any of these types of facilities?
I'll leave that one.
I know there's an asbestos waste one that is currently looking for more provincial approvals, and are there other facilities, and how are we currently managing them?
Thank you for the question. We don't currently have facility licensing. They are recognized under our solid waste management plan. So there is the three landfills up in Campbell River, and there's a slew of other smaller outfits here in the valley that take more like the C&D type waste, and none of them are. We don't license them per se. We don't have a business licensing option either under the regional districts. So they are approved through the Ministry of Environment for their operation, but we don't have oversight. They are named in our solid waste management plan as to how the entire how their waste is actually recorded, but we don't have any regulatory measures like this the scheme that Larry had just spoke of to get that data, aside from the material that they're already sending to the ministry for their annual reporting.
Okay, so there is some reporting to the ministry at this point,
Yeah.
but we have no say in any of it.
Not really.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vivian. And alternate director Nicole.
Thank you to the chair. Thanks for your presentation. It was informative. I think part of my question was answered, but I'd just like to know the difference between licensing with the province and how licensing works with your local government. Just how does that work? Does it do one before the other? Or?
Fabulous question. So the province typically regulates facilities that discharge directly to the environment. Landfill and large composting operations. Small composting operations just need to meet a regulation. So there are still requirements on them, but no site-specific requirements. Large ones do, but they don't regulate things like transfer stations. We have a number of in the RDN, there's a number of private facilities that accept various types of waste. And it might be, aggregate to crush and reprocess. It might be scrap metal dealers. It might be, things like large tire storage. It'll be recycled waste facilities. So where they take in large volumes of recyclable material for reprocessing. So they might sort it, bale it, those sorts of things. So there's lots of other facilities that manage waste outside of facilities the province directly regulates. Then as well, my Chilliwack example where somebody's just hauling waste to a piece of property and, dumping it. There's the province has tools to respond. So if they're burying it, then, burying waste requires a permit. So there's some, they can actually fine or charge on that. If somebody's just stockpiling it on a piece of property, so they're not actually burying it, then it really becomes questionable if it's a discharge to the environment. And if it's not, then the province doesn't really have any role in that either. If it's on agricultural land, the ALR might, but in the case of Chilliwack, my understanding is some of the material was actually, this is what I understand, was landfilled on the property so that they could be subject to penalties. But if it was just stored on the property, it's unlikely Ministry of Environment would take action. If it hadn't have been on ALR land, ALR would not have taken, or the Land Commission would not have taken action. And I would suggest all of the material would be sitting, would sit there with no provincial direction. Could local government do it for an infringement on zoning? Maybe. But I would suggest local government's options to mitigate that are really limited. So, there are a few facilities the province regulates directly in the RDN. I think there's, of course, the RDN landfill, but there is one composting operation that has an authorization, and there's a second composting operation that's in process of getting an authorization. So yet there's, I think, 14 facilities that the regional district regulates that the province doesn't have any direct oversight on.
Oh, thanks. Just further then, so if it was a large private commercial operation wanting to establish an operation in the province, they would have to go through the province. And then if lucky enough to get licensed, then search for an area to set up.
Only
for diverting probably a good 90% of the material.
Only if it was a landfill or a large food waste composting operation. Let's say it was Or it could be a incinerator as well would. But if somebody was taking large volumes of waste and just processing it, whatever, sorting it, baling it, maybe making a refuse-derived fuel or those sorts of things, there would be no provincial oversight.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Larry. And we'll go to Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I know you addressed this a little bit in the presentation and it's mentioned in the staff report, just around around your report. The resources and how there's that discrepancy between the number of staffing required and the number of licenses. So you note that the RDN, because I was, wondering why the RDN had only 0.3 in Couch and had, a lot more staff, but fewer licenses. Are you able to flesh that out a little bit more in terms of
Sure.
and how that would perhaps apply to our area? Thank you.
I'll give you two examples that I think will illustrate it. So keep in mind, my background was 28 years as a provincial regulator. I believe I'm a fairly skilled regulator, and it definitely is a skill. And from that, I learned, my take on it is only do what you have to do to get the end result and don't do anything more. So actually, during my tenure with the RDN, we reduced the level of oversight significantly. And one of the areas that we did that, well, two areas, my two examples, we exempted more facilities. So when I arrived, the RDN also required licenses on provincially regulated facilities. The province has lots of tools to deal with problems with things like landfills and stuff. I don't think local government needs to be there. And then secondly, we were starting to get into require a bunch of specific requirements like groundwater monitoring and submission of data. The RDN does not have hydrogeologists, contaminant transport experts. And that was all the stuff that I did in my previous life as a provincial regulator. The skill set to do that well is significant. So the approach the RDN took, the proponent still needs to deal with it. They need to identify what they're doing to address groundwater, to mitigate groundwater or prevent groundwater contamination. But it's really through, they need to describe it. And simply what the RDN does is, if there is a risk, you need to hire a qualified professional. You need to do what a qualified professional directs. And if you experience a problem, you need to notify the province, right? So that's different than actually evaluating the data. All the RDN does is make sure that they've retained a QP, they've had the QP do the appropriate level of work and assessment. So the RDN doesn't review their work. They just make sure it gets done. And if there's a problem, get it directed to the province, because they're the ones that have the ability to deal with it. So the level of oversight is much smaller because it's just, have you completed that task? The RDN doesn't review the work of the QP. They don't review the efficacy of the report to make sure they've done qualified work. That's the work done by qualified professionals is a responsibility under the local government, or it's the, I forget what the name of the act that regulates, professional engineers, technologists, biologists, like all the professionals that work in the field to make sure the appropriate work is done and they're accountable for it. So that's an example of where the regional district RDNs really backed off, where the other regional districts take a greater role in oversight in those areas.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take up too much time, but is it possible that, say, Cowichan just has more concerns about environmental issues or things like that than maybe the RDN, and they've taken a more robust approach in that way?
It's a good question because, it really, the proponent you're dealing with can have a huge impact on, the level of oversight. I would have taken a different regulatory approach
Okay.
that I think would have affected at least the same or better result. So there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Right.
Maybe not a,
Great. No,
But-
that's really helpful. Thank you.
yeah.
All right, thanks very much, Larry. And I'll go to Director McCollum. There we go.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation so far and the thoroughness of your answers. Yeah, listening to some of the questions that have been posed and just thinking about how, this would work in practice and choosing to stay out of that provincial regulatory framework. If there was, potentially a new business coming into either our regional district or Strathcona that wanted to open up some kind of large facility that I'm thinking of, the example that came to mind was like, burning waste to energy. I know that there was a proposal in Nanaimo many years ago that had quite a bit of public backlash to it. And if we were to choose to go the route of staying out of anything that's provincially regulated, would we be losing the ability to say yes or no to something like fairly impactful coming into the service? And maybe there's other regulations or regulatory tools that we would that would exist outside of this board, but I'm just wondering if there's a risk there.
I would say there is, right? I mean, you are giving up, you do, if you went down the licensing route, you would have the ability to put, oversight on provincially regulated facilities. If you chose to exempt, there is some risk that you have less direct influence on those types of facilities coming into your community. Do you have other tools to influence provincial decisions around operations? You still do. I think often with, and I think any waste management facility, I don't think it's as simple as, no, we don't want, it's an incinerator, we don't want it in our community, go away. I think it's really more of, can the facility be built and operate and not have any impact on the community or the environment? But if you really want to retain that, veto right that, a facility might not meet, societal needs, you might be giving up something.
And if there was existing facilities and we brought in licensing, there would be some type of grandfathering anyway. We couldn't go backwards in time, I would assume, by implementing a system like this.
You would definitely need to have some grandfathering. You'd have to build that into the bylaw. So for example, you've got some private landfill facilities. If you were going to regulate them, you'd need to bring in some grandfathering for that.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. And next, Director Sinnott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation. It's interesting. I mean, I understand it's coming from the solid waste management plan and the idea that we want to increase diversion. But at the end of the day, it's our job as the policymakers to determine what good we're doing for what people at what relative cost. And I don't have a very good grasp on the costing savings from diversion relative to the costing of the burdens being put on by adding additional regulatory requirements. We've got a lot of pressures in local government to have affordable housing. We have a lot of pressures with respect to worrying about extra burdens on businesses. And I look at the commentary that you had about people would apply for the license, they'd bring an operations plan, they'd have qualified professionals reliance, applications and fees. And I'm thinking to myself, and then renewals, and then regulatory oversight, And I'm thinking a lot of small businesses that would be potentially caught up in this, it's like thrift stores or Habitat for Humanity or other things like that. And I'm thinking, who has the ability to pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000? And then I can see the additional structural changes at the facilities that would be required, which would be very difficult once these things get implemented over time and regulations get readjusted, and regulatory burden increases generally over time. It rarely decreases. So I'm not really seeing whether we even have problems. And maybe staff can tell us, do we have unscrupulous operators? Do we have dumping problems like they mentioned at Cultus Lake? Where are we going relative to the cost we're asking to impose, particularly on our taxpayer? Because including putting the work back down onto the actual license holder, the licensee, the licensee or the licensor, we have also staff costs in different options. And I'm not quite sure where we want to fit on this spectrum, if at all, because I'm not seeing that there's an urgent need to move here today unless staff tell me otherwise. Thank you.
Excellent points. And they're kind of, what I took from that was kind of two pieces. One is, the cost of actually doing it, and then the burden on, kind of the small operators. Just, in the case of the RDN, that's why they exempted, kind of all of those small, like depots and places like that don't require licensing. It's really more restricted to kind of the larger, more traditional waste facilities that we think of, like transfer stations and things like that. So, and those facilities should, any of the responsible operators have done that work for all of the information that would be included in an operations plan. But your other point is the facility licensing has nothing to do with diversion. The other two pieces I'm going to talk about they're all about diversion. The waste facility licensing is really about mitigating nuisance or environmental impact from currently unregulated facilities, and to gather that information for, the reporting requirements so you can actually build systems to get higher diversion. But in itself, doesn't have anything to do with diversion.
If I could just add in there too, just to follow up on Larry's points, I think the presentation of this material today, it comes on the heels of, I believe, the last board meeting or the board meeting before, where we saw 3 other memos that described aspects of what is going into the solid waste management plan review process. And all of that will be considered by the board, by the RSWAC, and by the board in terms of overall costs and benefits, and how you want to form waste management going into the future for this region. So certainly no decisions today, but this is all part and parcel with the renewal process overall. So if that helps provide any context, really this is about giving you that background information today and being able to check in with Larry, who's providing some expert advice.
Thank you for the follow-up. Again, from staff, as a decision maker, I really want to see the examples of what harms we're trying to prevent, relatively speaking, with what the issues are in this first presentation and the relative costs. It's quite opaque to me as to what the regulatory burdens that would be being imposed. I can't tell my taxpayers what good we're getting at what relative cost at this point, and I need to be able to say so.
Thanks, and that will be obviously in the final report, but I appreciate you raising that, Director Senate, at this point. Now I have a question from Director Mawhinney.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the information so far. And kind of following up on what Director Senate was raising, I just wanted to make 2 small points. And one of them is that Quadra Island has experienced I guess an illegal waste dumping situation, which spanned quite a long time and was a very complex issue for the Strathcona Regional District to try and deal with. It started quite innocently and ended up being fairly large problem. And then, so it does happen. And in my personal island experience. And then, but my other question or comment, I guess maybe a question combo, is around the costs for regulating these facilities seem to be, I think, $80,000 to $200,000, depending on the choice that this board would make. But there was a comment about the relatively low cost of the actual license that would be the fee that would be charged to the facility. So I'm curious if the majority of that cost is expected to be borne by the service in general and all taxpayers versus the people or the companies that are using those licenses.
I just asked Vivian if she could take a quick look for what the current licensing fees. I'm just drawing a blank on what they are, but they're really not significant. They're in like the hundreds of dollars, like $500 or $1,000, something like that. It's a one-time application fee. And then, you know, if your operation changes, you increase the amount of material dealing or the types, then there's a fee associated with making amendments to the licensing. But we'll see if we can get those numbers for you. Oh, here you go. New facility is that 1,000? Oh, 1,500, and an existing is 200. And to amend, it's $1,000. So just anyway, in terms of that's where the fees are, and as you saw in the previous slide, the regulatory oversight is so variable on the amount of effort, you know, the number of facilities, and then the amount of effort or degree you would regulate to. And like I said, in the case of the RDN, they spend about a third of a staff member on the facilities that are regulated there.
All right, thanks, Larry. I'm just maybe going to check online. I haven't seen any hands. Any folks online want to ask a question or make a comment before we move on to the next Director Arbor? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess since you called us out online here, I thought I'd made a comment. I did hear the previous speakers, and I think it's a legitimate concern about us sort of self-imposing a new regulation, but I think at the same time, it's something that we can acknowledge long-term is sort of necessary because our landfill costs are quite high. I mean, I agree we need more information on the financial front, but at the same time, I think it's almost inevitable that these kinds of things are going to happen as we try to divert waste from the landfill and improve as per, you know, our last and current solid waste management plan and try to improve on our recycling outcomes. This would be definitely a consequential way to do it. I think it's unacceptable that we continue to just see people that do such a great work of recycling and then whether in apartment buildings or anything like that, like everything goes in the garbage. So there's already unfairness in the system. So that would be one way to resolve that. And my only comment and feedback, I guess, would be I'd be interested, in light of the cost of living crisis and all that, I'd be interested to see phase-in options around some of these regulatory tools. And because sometimes it's like, okay, this will come in like 7 years from now or 5 years from now. Like I'd be interested to see some of the timeline options as well around it, a little bit better defined. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Director Arbor, and certainly not calling anyone out online. Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss any hands while we're all busy with our conversation in the room. So at this point, seeing no further questions, maybe we'll move on to the next presentation.
Thank you. So we're getting more into diversion now. So waste separation, there's really two ways. So if diversion's important, we need to pull recyclable material out of waste. There's really two ways to get recyclables out of waste, and it's either separation at source, pull the material out at source, essentially the generator does it, so it has low system costs, or collect it all and put it in a machine and get a machine to sort it. And there's variations on this. So you could take, just all of your garbage and sort it with a machine. You could take, there's wet dry systems where you take all the wet material and collect that separately and either compost it or dispose, and then you try to sort the dry material. Or, you can pick up mixed recyclable streams and sort. But the more you rely on equipment to process and sort, the higher the system costs are because of the equipment and the labor involved. So if the generates it, sorts it, there's still labor, but you're not paying that cost. The generator's actually doing most of the work. So they're not attributed to the system cost. Where you take all the waste and try to process and sort, that's really usually associated with waste energy, because it's really hard to pull high value recyclables out of it. So essentially you pull out the high BTU material and you use it for fuel. You run it in an incinerator and generate energy from it. So where you source separate, there's lower contamination. So because you have lower contamination, you have higher valuable recyclables that are more marketable. And it's more likely those materials end up in a raw material stream. So there's a lot of benefit to source separation because of that. Lower system cost, better quality material. So in reviewing the RDN's solid waste management plan with their efforts around source separation, which is the path the RDN has chose to go. Ruben Anderson, he's a behavioral change consultant, and he reviewed it and he made this comment. From a behavioral perspective, it is impossible to increase recycling behavior if there is no recycling bin. And this is exactly the strategy that has been pursued for decades. Educate people about the importance of recycling, and then what? Are they supposed to take the recyclables home from the office in their purse? Bottom line, if you don't have anywhere to put the material, it's really hard to participate in diversion. So if people have source separation containers, it improves convenience. I mean, obviously the most convenient is to just throw everything in garbage, get it collected and hauled away. But if diversion's important and you're going to pull recyclables out of the waste, the most convenient is to have containers so people can participate in recycling. We also know where you improve convenience, it increases recycling. So, a lot easier to take the material at your, residence or place of business, put it in separate bins and collect it, store it and haul it to some remote location or a depot to have it separated there. So as you improve convenience, improves recycling. So if that's the case, why don't, and particularly a lot of residential services have, multi-stream collection or organics, recyclables and garbage. Typically businesses don't. And why is it? Well, it's cost. I mean, it costs more to have collection of, to have 3 bins and collection of 3 bins than it does of 1, right? But if you go back to my perspectives right at the start, diversion costs more than disposal. Okay, true. But diversion's good for the economy. So we can build the economy by improving the diversion. Yes, there is a cost. It costs more than disposal, but it's not just all costs, it's wasted. As we build diversion, we get a better economy. We provide more jobs, more good paying jobs, more sustainability. So it's not all downside about just cost for something different. There is an upside from the economic benefit. Yes, there is a cost, but it's the waste generators pay that cost, which in my mind, I think that's appropriate. So there's a couple of regional districts that have plans or systems in place to promote source separation. One is the Fraser Valley Regional District. They've introduced a bylaw, and this is a couple of years ago now, that requires recyclables or organics to go to a recycling facility. Really, in my discussions with the staff there, it's really more of an educational tool. They really don't do any enforcement on it, mainly because it's incredibly challenging to enforce. I mean, you'd actually have to have staff there that would, watch when material is picked up and follow the trucks to find out where it's actually being disposed of, to, maybe giving, a $500 ticket or something. So it's really more of an educational tool. They haven't really done any work to determine the efficacy of the bylaw, but anecdotally, they think it's had a little bit of influence with some of the multifamily residences that have a little bit more recycling than what they did previously. So again, fairly simple to introduce, really more education. Does it really have an impact? Probably pretty nominal. The regional district in Nanaimo, and you'll see it says draft, they've actually been approved by the province. Well, they actually received a dedicated regulation by cabinet to allow them to introduce a bylaw that requires everybody to have source separation bins. So this wasn't done through the solid waste management plan because it's not a tool you can actually access through a solid waste management plan. This was a specific regulation passed by cabinet for the regional district in Nanaimo. And it takes a little different approach, and it just requires everybody. So this is every, resident and every business to have source separation bins. It also gives the option for someone to contract with a hauler or a processor to send them mixed waste. So say even like a construction site, if they want to have separate bins for putting, like the wood and other garbage, those sorts of things, they could do that, or they could just put it all in one bin, work with, a company that would actually take it and pull the recyclable material out of the bin and separate the material. It only requires the containers. It doesn't compel the use. So, so long as you have 3 containers, you don't have to use it. You can stick everything in the one garbage bin so long as you have the other 2. So really easy to enforce because it's simply, do you have the bins or not? So why put in a regulation that requires people to have bins but not require them to use it? Well, a few reasons for that. One, policing the use of bins does not work. There's a number of jurisdictions that have tried it in the past, and the community and San Francisco and Alaska were 2 of the ones that did. The idea of it's simple, but communities they don't want government staff walking around looking in their bins, see what they put in the bins. They're not willing to pay for it. So in a concept, it could work, but it doesn't. Secondly, if people have the bins, are more likely to use them, right? So because they gives everybody the ability to participate in waste diversion, they're more likely to do it. Particularly things like multifamily. I don't know about here, but I know when I was with the RDN, we regularly got calls and going, why don't we have, an organics bin, a recycling bin, and whatever. So that's the other piece. And then when we get to the next section, when I talk about waste hauler licensing, that's the tool the RDN will be using to encourage the waste haulers to actually promote the use of the separate bins. So there really wasn't a need to require people to use them. There's another mechanism to have a positive influence. So again, pretty easy to enforce bylaw. Another way that you could, or any local government could look at having everybody have multiple bins would be to set up a compulsory service. So this would be akin to some of the residential curbside that you have throughout the Comox Strathcona, where people pay for the service. It's a compulsory service. You get garbage collection whether you choose to use it or not. And it's possible to expand such a system throughout the whole, regional district. it definitely, take different equipment for different levels of service. So, businesses would see, front load trucks versus, the side load trucks that are collected at curbside. May not make sense for some of the remote areas, but it's possible to do it. This is a concept that was put forward when the RDN worked on their solid waste management plan, and there was zero support for it. Generally, everybody wanted to see industry to continue to provide service and have a competitive process, keep competition in place so people would get best service, lower cost, and drive innovation. So in the case of the RDN, expanding the residential curbside to every waste generator was not at all supported. But all three of those concepts have the same intent, which is to make source separation containers available. And it goes back to the comment from Ruben Anderson, really hard to participate in diversion if you don't have any place to put the diverted waste. So if this concept was to be applied within Comox Strathcona, put together some ballpark costing on what it would be. So, the Fraser Valley example, which, their approach has been largely educational or promotional. It probably has very little impact on diversion. It does have some, so probably less than 1% of your waste stream. Pretty easy, simple to put it in, probably a $5,000, cost for, there should be some kind of, promotion of it. And, there would likely be some regulatory oversight. I know when I talked to Fraser Valley, they had some bylaw people talk to some of the multifamily residents that had complained about, not having, ability to separate or to recycle or some of their material. So probably minimal cost, minimal to set up, probably $5,000 annually. If you were to look at actually enforcing it, incredibly complex to enforce, minimal cost to set up, or probably something in the order of $170,000 a year to carry out, enforcement of it. You would increase the diversion probably in the range of 4%. The RDN example probably costs a little bit more to set up, and there's kind of the $40,000 is really largely on educating the whole community on the need for it, as well as getting a regulation passed by cabinet to allow you to do something similar. But now that the RDN's done it, there's probably more appetite if others were to pursue that. And then probably about $30,000 annually, because there's going to be some need for regulatory oversight. I suspect that dollar amount would fall very quickly. One, as people are aware of it, and once the system gets in place. And when I talk about the waste hauler licensing, it's an incentive for industry to sell this concept. So I think the enforcement would really drop off, but probably in the order of 4% diversion. You could get the same level of diversion with the compulsory system. Setup costs are huge. And probably something in the order of $26 million annually to carry out. There's currently, for the existing collection systems that you have in place, there is money being paid for those. So it would be, reduce, that 26 million includes those costs, but still it's huge. But those are, the options that are available if you were to consider making source separation bins available. So any questions on this piece?
All right, and perhaps Larry, you might even go back to the previous slide, as there's a fair amount of information on there. I'm guessing it may end up being useful. And we'll go first to Director Sinnott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again. So my first question was, just to be clear, right now we have source separation in some respects, not perfect in terms of recyclables for residential single-family homes. So are we trying to just reach that same level of separation? Or are we going to do more for residential? That's sort of the first part of my question. Like single-family homes, we're going to stay the same, and this is just mainly for multifamily and commercial operations?
So, yeah, I think there's a couple of ways you could set it up, because in the RDN, every single family residence gets residential curbside collection, and it's a multi-bin system. So really in the RDN, no impact to them. The bylaw of the RDN is putting forward affects all businesses and all multifamily. So everything from the accountant's office to the machine shop, to the multifamily. That's what the bylaw affects there. If you were to look at similar here, I know you have a mix where there is residential collection that has multi-stream collection. I would say it wouldn't have any impact on those. For the areas that don't receive collection, if you were to do something similar, either the Fraser Valley model or the RDN model, then I would suggest it would or it could impact all of those people. Now, of course, you know, if a particular area wanted to divide it up, it doesn't necessarily need to mean you have to have the same requirement in all areas. So some of the remote areas, there's nothing that would compel you to have, you know, the requirement the same across the board. But I actually think the principle's the same. I do think even in, so just to back up a minute, when I spent my 28 years with the province, a lot of it was the interior of British Columbia. So everything from, you know, like, you know, Watson or, well, you know, Fort Nelson in the north, you know, out Bulkley, Chaco, Prince George area, Caribou, all through there. So I've worked with waste management with a lot of rural communities. But there is opportunity to do diversion even in rural communities. So even if they had, and again, with the RDN example, it doesn't compel the use of the bins, but if people have bins, they're more likely to use it. So is it more likely people are going to compost, even if they compost at home, if they actually have a bin to put the compostable material in? So it's some, you know, if you were to pursue it, it's something to consider whether the premise holds true in all areas or just in some areas.
Okay, I think I get it. But my concern, of course, at the city of Camberra was making sure that we knew our plans going forward for, you know, waste collection weren't going to change significantly in the city, but now we're talking about expanding it to multifamily and commercial. And then we have to talk about what that looks like for various different multifamily and commercial to provide these various bins. So let's talk about low-income multifamily, like older apartment buildings in town that may not have all these different bins, or perhaps people who do it. But I take it they just have to get new bins and more commercial services to pick up the different bins for the different streams. So, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to, do we have the costing to the individuals and the cost to the doors or to the businesses to do that, so that we understand the impacts that we're asking people to incur for a 3% above basically a very minimal sort of education program? Is the benefit worth the cost? And that's a question I hope staff can clarify for us later on. Thanks.
I don't have the numbers with me, and I honestly, I don't want to go from memory because I won't get it right, but I will provide it to Vivian. And, you know, perhaps she can share it with the board. So this is just with respect to multifamily. Most multifamily, at least in the regional district in Nanaimo, and I suspect here, and I know most communities, multifamily recycling is typically picked up as part of the commercial waste stream. Okay, so the difference is that material is not managed through Recycle BC. So the company that picks it up, so Waste Management or whatever, that picks up the material, they manage those recyclables through their commercial waste stream, and it comes at a cost. So as I said, diversion costs. So they pay for that. But the reason they do it as part of the commercial waste stream is there's not enough multifamily that participate in recycling So it's not worth setting a dedicated truck around to pick up recycling from multifamily and run it through the Recycle BC program. Because if they mix commercial waste and residential waste, they can't feed it into the Recycle BC process that actually manages waste and pays the cost for collection and processing of those materials. So what is almost certainly to happen when every multifamily is being collected, because now they have multiple bins. So now a hauler they really can't offer a single bin, or they won't be offering a single bin service because every customer has multiple bins. All of them are going to offer a multiple bin service. So once they start to do that, if all multifamily are collecting recycling, they're going to be sending dedicated trucks around to collect that residential recycling, and it'll get processed through the Recycle BC process. So the cost of that, we did some work in the RDN to estimate what those impacts were, because basically a third of the waste stream is now being paid for by Recycle BC. And I can't remember the cost increase that's expected to be incurred for multifamily, but it's minimal.
Thank you. I just want to make everyone understand, my concern is like when I deal with not-for-profit organizations that run supportive housing, they are bound by lots of agreements with BC Housing or other commercial operators who get CMHC support. They have covenants that restrict their ability to increase any of their rents. So we're asking the landlords to subsidize these. And as we know, with their current residential tenancy, there's very limited ability to increase rents in the current situation. So the more pressure you put on landlords, the less likely you're going to have people building housing if you don't have this predictable or some sort of grant system, particularly for ones that are providing affordable housing or subsidized housing. I'm just saying you have to be really careful about changing the way you're doing these multifamily operations and not contemplating the downside that you could be creating. And I don't know whether the Recycle BC has that type of program or should be encouraged to sort of soften the blow, because we don't want to inadvertently create a downward incentive on housing.
Right, and we'll go to Director Mawhinney.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for you, Larry. There's something that you said a couple times now, which is that diversion costs more than disposal. And my question is pretty straightforward. I'm just curious if that equation includes all of the construction, maintenance, and then long-term, costs of landfill after it's closed and all of those costs.
Short answer, in my opinion, yeah, it does. And the simplest way to look at it is businesses are in business to maximize profit for shareholders or owners. If there's a way to make money on it, they'll do it, right? Well, we wouldn't see any landfills if there was more money in diverting materials. And there's not. And then if you think about every time you touch something, or any time a business touches something, it comes at a cost. So when you start collecting 3 streams as compared to 1 stream, when you start to actually take the material out and remove materials from it, it's all time and labor. So yeah, diversion costs more than disposal. If you want cheap landfill, you can't beat the cost of a landfill. It doesn't give you the same economic benefits, but if you want cheap, it's the cheapest way to go.
All right, thanks. And we'll go to Director McCollum next.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of flesh out a little what the cost differences are between the 1B and the 2A, like, why that's, I guess I'm assuming because we would essentially do no enforcement around requiring the separation bins, is that?
No, it's a simplicity of enforcement. So it's really easy. So the fines for whatever, not having bins or not advising your residents that their bins are available, they're really nominal fines in the RDN. So as well, the ticketing provisions in the RDN, and I'm trying to think of the name for it, but it's a really simple process. So it's really easy for a bylaw enforcement officer to roll up and go, you don't have an organics bin, you don't have a recycling bin, here's your ticket, right? For the most part, I mean, the RDN is going to be putting an intensive amount of education in advance before anybody gets a ticket. But it's really, from a ticketing, like, it's really simplistic, right? It takes, kind of, you drive up, you're on site for a half an hour, you write a ticket and you go away. To actually enforce that somebody has taken their material to a recycling facility, essentially you're going to have to do a stakeout in an unmarked car, watch for the material to go into the bin, wait till it gets picked up, follow the truck to where it gets disposed, and then determine if it's actually the materials getting recycled or not. The ability, like it, in all honesty, it's not enforceable. It'll never ever happen. And Fraser Valley recognized, is this televised? Yeah, well, I believe Fraser Valley recognizes the challenge, and I don't think I'm talking out of school. They recognize the enforcement challenge, and they're free to admit that it's primarily an education tool. They really would like to see people have the ability to participate in diversion, but they recognize the limitations in the bylaw.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for kind of zoning in on that a bit. I guess, like, in my mind, our unique service has kind of two things that, two gaps, and one is the multifamily, and in the urban areas, that will become a bigger piece of our waste as we densify, especially with a lot of the regulations that are coming down from the province and probably over the next 10 years. And then we have this other piece where we have a huge amount of our residents living outside of our municipal boundaries and don't have curbside collection. And I guess where I'm not confident on the separation bins is just how that would really improve diversion in those areas where there's no public service that's going curbside. And I think that's really has a pretty big impact on our low diversion rates in our area. And I understand that, our landfill, a lot of the traffic there is private vehicles that are dealing with their own waste. And I guess I just would like to hear whether going this route, from what you understand of it, whether or not that would help with our diversion in those areas that don't opt into a curbside pickup system.
It's a good question. So I receive residential curbside collection and I have a 3-bin service, but I still have additional recycling bins because there's material I can't put in that I take to the depot. And I suspect most of you have similar. So I really don't think the burden on a resident is a big deal. I think they probably already have it for the most part. I do think there's often, small, medium-sized businesses that this would impact, and you'd see an increase in diversion. So on the residential scale, probably pretty nominal. On the commercial scale, I think you'd see a difference.
All right, and got a question from Director Grant.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering on the multifamily, it's a bit of a gap that we have, in the municipalities. And one of the problems we have in our town is that a lot of these were built prior to recycling being what we were doing, and the trucks just physically can't get in, right? They can't get in and get to each door, and there's no room to put 3 big bins out there. So is there a solution to that somewhere?
Sure. So that's part of the reason that the RDN said either have 3 bins or contract to the surface. It'll do both collection separation, right? So, it's an easy fix. You don't have space, put it all in, keep doing what you're doing and just pay the cost for somebody else to sort it. But, and I realize that's a little cavalier, but I'm always, where there's an incentive, I'm always amazed at industry's ability to innovate, to be able to, to overcome some of those challenges. So, just simply before there was multi-stream collection, every collection truck that did curbside was a single container truck. Now pretty much any truck on the road is, a dual bin system. Some of them have as well other additional side load for things like glass and whatever. So what industry's done is they've adapted their equipment to overcome those challenges so they can provide the most efficient service. So, we're in it for the long-term game. It's not going to change things tomorrow, but, over generations, we're going to see changes in equipment to provide better efficiency to meet, some of the standards that are put in place.
All right, and a couple more questions. So we have, let's see who's got the flashing green light.
We can't see your mic.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so much easier. Thank you. Okay, so we got Vivian.
Thank you for that, Larry, and thank you for the question, Director Grant. I just wanted to provide a bit of context for our region as to how we're actually managing that. We actually have a pilot for multifamilies that's currently underway. Our community educator, Lindsay Eason, has identified four, I think possibly 5 multifamilies in the core municipalities to be able to really understand what those challenges are and to work with the haulers to identify options, especially there is a new building in Comox, that's the part of it, but the other 3 are older buildings that are not necessarily equipped in the same way that we would like to see future developments, but they're working with the haulers to be able to provide toter systems, to be able to just understand that there are the space constraints. And through that pilot, we'll be able to translate that to understanding and experience for future expansion.
Thanks, Vivian, and Director Benesh.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering on the cost of diversion, whether the landfill costs that you're consider the greenhouse gas emissions, particularly for organics. That's something I'm really concerned about is, if we're putting organics in landfills, we're creating all this methane. When we visited the Campbell River facility last year, we're told 50,000 tons of methane a year before we got it capped, and we're burning it now. And I'm just wondering if that cost is considered, and especially considering BC spent $1 billion on wildfires last year, 720 million on insurance, and it's certainly a cost, and it's a complex issue. I'm wondering if that's part of the equation.
Yes, and as you say, it's really complex, but landfills run on economy of scale, like most businesses. So although there's a couple of landfills in the US on the Washington-Oregon border, there's 2 there's, and they would never, they're private landfills, they would never share what their costs are, but their operational costs are probably under $20 a ton for disposal. because they're massive sites and they operate on economy of scale, right? So, you know, if you want cheap, you amass as much as you can, you build as much economy of scale and you put it and you dispose of it. When you're talking those kinds of per ton costs, and you compare what it costs to manage, you know, process, take recyclables out of waste, process it, you know, so take a stream plastics, all of the plastics collected through Recycle BC, go to Merlin's Plastics. If you ever have a chance, go through the facility. It's a multi-million-dollar facility that's got just uses an incredible amount of energy with conveyors and sensors, and staff that sort all of the material, pull all the garbage out, put it into multiple plastic streams, take the different types of plastic, make pellets that go into the raw material stream. It's phenomenal. Like what they've achieved is it's a really impressive place. But you go there and you look at the costs, the infrastructure, the energy needs to do it. Yeah. And you compare it with somebody on a dozer working at a landfill, even if you include, you know, lining systems, monitoring leachate process, you know, collection and treatment, you know, the landfill gas management, and some of those costs. So the environmental costs of methane release, it's not really captured anywhere, right? Like who's paying that bill? Like it is an impact, but who's paying that bill? Like nobody. So if you're talking, you know, cost in terms of dollars, yeah, landfilling's cheap.
And, I think Sarah Willie wanted to make a response as well. Just get your light on. Oops.
Yeah, thank you, Director Finish, for that comment. I didn't get a chance to chime in earlier. Yeah, I agree with what Larry's saying, but I think to your point about whether the greenhouse gas impacts are included in that statement, that diversion will always cost more than landfilling. There are not tools like the internal cost of carbon or that have been accounted for. So those fugitive landfill emissions are not part of the costing that Larry's speaking to. As he mentioned, it's not the cost of doing business currently, right? So those realities for private businesses and even for public businesses, you know, we as CSWM have not decided to, you know, pay for the emissions that are being released as a part of our service. And so that is not internalized in our cost of disposal. But arguably it is also not internalized in the diversion facilities like Merlin that he speaks to. So it does depend where you draw that line. If you wanted to incorporate those costs, then the metric might change. But under the current, you know, business parameters, the physical cost, the dollar value, yes, is higher for disposal than diversion.
Thanks, Sarah. And see, actually, Director Chapman has a hand up line, and then we'll go to Director Morin after that. So, Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that it's difficult to collect recyclables from already established and previously built multi-residential units. With that said, we need to find a solution somewhere. We are all aware that municipalities are under great pressure to build more housing, whether it's multi-residential, townhouses, and that sort of thing. So we should be putting in or have some criteria that was required for builders to build something so that accommodates the recycling. And we need to get our act together before we can ask them to get their act together. Right now, we're talking about a 3-bin system. Well, is it going to be a 4-bin system eventually? So we need to gather all of our information, come up with a strategy and a concept of how we're going to manage this, and make sure we can collect from multi-residential, because that is the easiest pickings. Is, you know, when you have people all gathered together like that, that's the easiest pickup you're ever going to make. So we should be making sure we can focus on that, make sure we can accommodate that and service that. So I think we need further discussion on this whole issue, which I know that's coming with our waste management plan. But we need to get more information together. Several people have mentioned about the multi-residential units that are basically go without service. And I think we should be focusing on servicing them. Now, I don't know if it requires a specialized truck or whatever the case may be, but I think we need to be creative, think outside the box, and let's get this done. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Director Chapman. Larry, did you want to make any kind of response to that? Or
No, I agree.
okay, Larry agrees. Okay, we'll move on then to Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll start with my cheeky comment first, which if we go back to the comment around surveillance and unmarked cars, since we've implemented our new waste management, I would say that some of the residents think we're already doing that. We have a whole team of people keeping an eye on them and all of that. But I guess my question is around, we've had a lot of talk about how it's more expensive for diversion, but of course and I think Sarah kind of segued into what I'm going to say, that there's the cost benefit analysis that's beyond just that dollar figure. And I guess when I think about behavioral change and all the things that we've done over history, whether it's bringing in seat belts or whatever, that probably cost money. Cars had to, now include seat belts, but it had a benefit to the general public in tons of ways. So I think anytime we're trying to create behavioral change, we have to look at that aspect. I mean, my mom's generation, really very little waste. If they did get packaging in a store, it might have been a jar of something, and that jar got reused with my milk and my school lunch or whatever. And I think that we have an opportunity with the new, the generation now, or as our young lad here, that they're interested in that. They're interested in going to more minimalist, they're into recycling, all that kind of stuff. So I think those kinds of benefits shouldn't be overlooked, that if you look at the countries that have really good waste diversion, particularly in Europe, 50% plus, what are the benefits that they're seeing? So I'd love to see some of that as we explore this further, those comparisons to parts of the world that are doing a really good job of that, and what are the benefits that they're seeing that are beyond those number, because we do have some goals here around climate change and all of that. And I think, those are the things that also factor into this. I can guarantee that those countries in Europe are seeing huge benefits for their good job at waste diversion. So I don't know if you have anything to comment on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up. So I believe the staff report was actually an attachment to the technical memos, and when I arrived at the RDN, they already had, done remarkable things around waste reduction that I wasn't part of developing, but I would regularly hear or be questioned about other jurisdictions and what they've achieved. So we RDN staff put a bit of effort into doing a jurisdictional scan throughout the world, and that staff report is attached to that technical memo. And it is a few years old, so I'm sure there's been other innovations and improvements. So that's probably a 2017 when that report was done. But in a nutshell, Canada's the best in the world. BC's the best in Canada. RDN's the top 3 in BC. In other words, RDN's got world-class waste diversion, and it's really as good as it gets, and it's still not near good enough. There's so much opportunity to do more, and that's why the strategies we've been talking about here are definitely a departure from what other jurisdictions have done, and it's really to try to move that needle much further than what it is. I agree with you, like it used to be even, not even our parents' age, it wasn't that long ago, you went in the grocery store and everything was in paper and glass, right? Now everything's lightweighted in plastic. And my comment about, a disposable society, I don't think we're going to go back to where we see, packaging and durable packages that get reused. So, my solution for the world is to try to get end-use products into the raw material stream and the resource stream instead of dispose of it. And yes, I believe it has huge environmental benefits, but I also believe there's huge economic benefits with doing that as well. But there is a cost to doing it.
All right, thanks, Larry. I see no further questions on this report, so we'll now move on to the waste hauler report. Thanks for your endurance, and I guess perhaps after that we'll take a very brief break.
Thanks for your endurance. So the other 2 concepts are pretty simple. This one gets a little bit more complicated, and again, this is an RDN model that was conceived, started back in about 2015, was in the solid waste management plan in 2018. Where the plan was approved, and I think it was 2020 by the minister. And the minister just in the last month or so has actually approved the bylaw that allows the regional district to introduce waste hauler licensing, which is scheduled to become live the start of next year. So just, even from when the plan was adopted by the board, 2018, it's been a long, long process for them to get to this stage. The ministry was very cautious in approving it because this model doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So what the goal of the waste hauler licensing, it's to grow the waste industry and grow the waste industry to provide more services around diversion. Of course, local government can provide more services directly, but we don't see the same benefit in terms of, economic benefit and lower cost and innovation than getting industry to do it. So that was kind of the premise about leveraging the industry to improve more services around diversion. So the objectives was to first encourage the flow of waste to the industry. In the case of the RDN, about 1/3 of the waste stream comes directly from waste generators and doesn't throw through what we consider kind of the traditional waste industry that manages and processes and collects waste. So the concept for doing that was to reduce the tipping fee on the disposal of non-recyclable material. So there's still a high cost or even a higher cost due to surcharges if they bring in recyclable material, but for stuff that's truly waste, to give them a lower fee than, any other customer. And then it was also intended to incent the industry to divert more material. So make disposal of recyclables more expensive, and that's with the surcharges. And then basically reduce or eliminate the ability to export for the purpose of cheap disposal. The RDN has seen waste regularly moved out to other jurisdictions for cheaper disposal. That's been tempered quite a bit in more recent. There used to be barges going down to the US sites, kind of every day back in about 2015. That's curtailed, and I think there's, you know, kind of three reasons, primarily increasing fuel costs, the difference between the Canadian and US dollar, and then as well some of the initiatives the RDN's been working on like this. The industries sees this coming and has changed some of the way they've managed waste. And then the other, finally, it was to have generators pay the system costs rather than collect it from taxpayers. So, oh, let me back that up a minute. No, okay. Anyway, the existing system, it's basically garbage is collected by trucks, or primarily, you know, people do self-haul to the landfill. Material goes to the landfill, and some of it's recycled. So the waste hauler licensing system is intended to grow the industry. So how do you do that? You send them more customers. Well, the way you send them more customers is you reduce their tipping fee. So the current system in the RDN, and I would say the same here, if a waste hauler, waste business is going to manage your waste, they've got, and it ends up at the landfill, they've got the tipping fee, then they've got their handling costs or processing costs. So they can't offer a reduced fee than what the landfill offers, tipping fee, because they have additional costs. So the way to give them that benefit is to give them a reduced fee so they can actually charge, you know, either less, the same, maybe even a bit more, so that the waste actually flows to their business. And how can they do that? Well, you know, even if they charge more, maybe they're more convenient location, maybe the attendant's helping unload the truck, maybe they're providing a gravel mart in conjunction with what they're doing. You know, maybe they get better hours of operation. There's lots of things local government, or sorry, businesses can do to attract customers. But in the end, they still need to be profitable doing that business. So the idea is reduce tipping fee, have the waste start to flow more, most of the waste, if not all of it, flow through industry before it comes to, you know, the landfill or transfer station. If you were to stop there with a reduced fee, they would just collect more waste and bring more waste to the landfill. So you'd still be getting all the waste, it would just throw through industry. But the other piece is to include a disposal levy for disposal anywhere. So in the case of the RDN, they will be imposing a $25 disposal levy. And that's really for the privilege of taking waste to be disposed of anywhere. So if somebody wants to take waste and ship it up to Comox, Strathcona, and dispose of it in a landfill here, they'll pay the regional district a $25 fee for the privilege of doing that. There is a significant amount of the RDN's waste management system is paid for by tipping fees. And that's more than just managing a landfill transfer station. That's, you know, solid waste management planning, education, waste reduction initiatives. So there's a bunch of activities the RDN does that it's also that is paid for partly through tipping fees. Waste that leaves the region does not contribute in those costs. So it's also a way to have people in the regional district that generate waste contribute to those costs. But what it does is it essentially prevents the industry or discourage the industry for looking for outside disposal, other locations that escapes the RDN's requirements. So the RDN has restrictions on, you know, surcharges where recyclables, for instance, are disposed of at the landfill. So, you know, one way to escape those surcharges is send it somewhere else. Well, the disposal levy makes it more expensive to do that. So essentially, they're captured by playing in the RDN system. The benefit is they get, you know, it's cheap for disposal of what is truly waste, but more expensive for materials that could be recycled. So what's industry likely to do? They're likely to divert more. So These are the RDM proposed rates, and I actually just got these this morning because they haven't amended the bylaw yet, but this is the intention that they're going forward with. So starting next year, they're expecting $150 tipping per ton tipping fee. I think the current tipping fee is $145. So with the assuming that gets approved, the hauler rate would be $105 a ton. And the disposal levy would be $25 a ton. Their net costs will be $130 a ton. So $20 less than anybody else. So they've got room to actually attract more material. And even if it ends up in a landfill, they could still be profitable. If they divert more, they're more profitable. Right, so the intention is to divert that material, and then the disposal levy applies regardless of where they dispose of the material. So they could take it down to a US landfill, they could take it down to Capital Regional District, they could bring it to a site here. Either way, the regional district will collect a $25 per ton disposal levy. The CRD has implemented a program that has some aspects of the waste hauler licensing scheme. And this is really new, so yet to see what the impacts, but they're offering a $25 tipping fee rebate if businesses voluntarily report their waste collection data. And I should back up the waste hauler licensing. It's not just a fee piece. It also requires, the companies to have a business license. It requires them to remit the levy. It requires them to report kind of the source and disposal of the materials they're managing. So there is a reporting function as well. I should also say that for the largest hauler, that reduced fee will benefit them by more than $500,000 annually from what they would otherwise be paying. So it's, although $20 a ton doesn't seem like a lot when you add up a whole bunch of tons. The haulers actually will see quite an economic benefit. But with the incentive program, $25 a ton rebate, voluntary reporting, they agree to promote multi-stream collection. So again, with that fee rebate, it should encourage flow of more waste through industry, which is a positive thing. It should encourage diversion. It would be far more effective if they set standards for diversion and they're actually checked. It's too early in the program to know if the Capital Regional District intends to do that or not. It doesn't discourage low-cost disposal. So, if the Capital Regional District gets more restrictive on what they accept at their landfills, like with the use of surcharges for recyclable material, and a hauler chooses to move the material to a different jurisdiction to avoid that, it doesn't have that same discouragement as what the disposal levy will apply. But there is quite a difference in cost between the two. The waste hauler licensing startup costs about $80,000, and that's probably for over the first kind of 3 years, because it is a fairly complicated legislative framework and a fair bit of community education promotion that needs to happen. The RDN did extensive consultation throughout development and of the process. And then annually, it's probably, $150,000 a year to administer. It's reasonably simple to administer. The RDN's expecting about 15% diversion as a result of both in combination of the waste hauler licensing, sorry, not the RDN. When we applied the same kind of concepts to Comox Strathcona, I have to apologize. These are what the costs would be In your case, I can say the RDN spent more than $80,000 a year building the system. These would be about what you could expect your costs to be, about $80,000 for the first 3 years, and then about $50,000 for implementation. And then you potentially see a diversion return of about 15%. Whereas the collector incentive program that the CRD has developed, really minimal cost to start up. They're just offering a rebate, so pretty simple to do. If they were to, if they're not going to check that people actually follow through with promoting diversion, it's going to be fairly low cost. If they are going to check, it escalates the cost significantly. I would estimate, for this area, somewhere in $120,000 a year, and depending on the level of effort, to actually ensure that people participate in, the diversion rebate, yeah, I think, somewhere in the 4 to 9% reduction. So that's it for the licensing piece, but just kind of to wrap up the presentation, the concepts that are presented, they're really about a way for government to build systems with the goal to get end-of-life products back in material, ensure their waste generators pay or can participate in recycling. And part of that is having containers for source separation. When I said earlier, my perspective is government, local government doesn't need to provide all the services. They need to build service systems to actually have this happen. I think this is a way it could be done. It's intended to motivate generators, haulers, and processors to all participate in diversion. And I think that's what's currently lacking with our current systems that we have now. It's really to grow the waste industry and leverage their innovation. And the benefit we get, increased GDP and improve our economy. As well, my perspective is, don't regulate more than necessary. And I think that's the model that the RDN will probably continue with. And from what I showed you, you saw quite a difference with their approach compared to a couple of other regional districts that have some of the same regulatory tools. And if you do want to do any of these things, you need to include them in your solid waste management plan, because that's the way to open the doors for all of these things, including the waste source separation. Although you can't get the authority directly through your plan, in the case of the RDN, that was the tool that actually allowed them to get it before cabinet to develop or to pass a dedicated regulation for the RDN to do that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Larry. Not seeing any lights. Maybe I'll ask a question to start things off. Is are you able to go back to the previous slide? So I think the footnote number 2 does not include lost revenue due to rebate and reduced tip fees. And I'm guessing that versus, say, in option 1, versus the 50,000 annual cost to operate the program, I'm guessing the reduced revenue from tipping fees probably is significantly greater than that. Do you have especially if you're achieving 15% diversion, which obviously we're working towards diversion, but I'm curious if you have any kind of estimate as to what the loss in tipping fees would be.
Offhand, no, I don't.
Okay.
It wouldn't be a difficult number to produce. And I know, it's, what are you taking annually? Well, if you did a $20 differential, or $25 differential, $70,000 times 20 or 25, there's your number, right? Because in the case of the RDN, it's really doesn't make a difference what the actual, tipping fee is or the hauler cost. It's really the differential. And unless you have like a $20 or $25 differential, the waste isn't going to flow to industry. There's not a big enough upside. Whether that's the right number, The RDN will know once it's put in place. We did enough work to feel we're pretty confident that'll be enough to shift the flow.
Okay, and I assume those figures will be in the next iteration of the report. That would be great to have those just to get a fuller picture. Okay, and Director Therrien.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering the disposal levy, how do you enforce that once they put it on a truck and take it to a different district? How do we know how much they've taken away? How
No, fabulous question, right? So it's self-reporting. So the waste industry is really good at tracking waste, right? So there's a few things that'll happen. Under the RDN system, the RDN landfill is now the cheapest game in town. Going anywhere else is going to be more expensive. So almost everything's going to flow to the RDN anyway. So the RDN knows how much they tip over their scales. So, that's one piece. Secondly, the majority of players, they're kind of big business, right? And even some of the, local haulers like Milner and DBL, they're not small operators. Pretty much, and partly due to the waste stream licensing that's been in place for two decades, the RDN benefits from scrupulous operators. There's really nobody trying to fly under the radar there. None of them are going to cheat. They may not like some of the rules, but if the rules are in place, they work very hard to follow them. So then thirdly, there's such an economic benefit with the reduced tipping fee that they're going to want to participate in the program. They kind of have to, but not just that they have to because of the regulation. There's a big enough benefit. Like I said, the local hauler overnight, their overhead's going to drop by $500,000. Like as soon as it goes in, it's $500,000. Like it's not insignificant. Then thirdly, or fourth, whatever, the industry is really good about notifying the RDN if somebody's playing in their field that's not following the rules, right? So even with the waste stream licensing, if there's somebody not playing, they're quick to let you know that somebody's not doing what they should, and they keep pretty good tabs on it. So the RDN's going to hear. And then in addition, the bylaw has provision that the RDN can compel the hauler to have a third-party auditor come in and audit their books. So not the RDN looking at it, but just the risk, the fear of having them, and they pay for it, have a third-party auditor come in is definitely going to encourage them to follow the rules. So the RDN felt there's enough checks and balances there that it's unlikely people are going to cheat. And the risk of losing the licensing, you actually can't operate in the regional district. Like, there's such a big risk. If you don't have a license, you can't operate. So they won't cheat.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess similar question. The divertible materials, how are we enforcing that end of it, making sure that they are following that? Where's the enforcement mechanism on that end of it, making sure that the recyclables are out of the stream that they're tipping at a reduced rate?
So there's kind of two parts to that answer. The RDN has over the last couple of years is invested in a fairly very good monitoring, like camera monitoring system to actually, so they've always had very good screening of waste coming into the site. They've improved on that with like cameras and stuff. So it's really easy to identify like materials and stuff when it's tipped. They have been working on, and even when I was there, we started to work on it, but things slowed down a bit because of the delay with the province approving, and we weren't certain we were going to get approval for the licensing. But what the RDN will be doing is increasing their screening of loads coming into the site. So there are, and it's been accepted through the courts that you can do visual observations to estimate the amount of contaminants and waste, and it'll stand up in court. It's about having the checks and balances to actually demonstrate should there be challenges. I mean, the RDN's a long way off of actually being heavy-handed in their surcharges, because really you want to give industry a chance to transition before they start to increase the use of those surcharges. But so they've got a very effective screening. So if stuff's coming in that shouldn't, the benefit of the licensing, it becomes it becomes so high, it encouraged they will try to avoid those costs. Then secondly, it's really built on incentives. So if we can get the waste to flow to industry, they're already incented to try to take that material and manage it in other ways for beneficial use. So let me illustrate with an example. Right now in the RDM, pretty much all of the roofing companies haul their asphalt shingles to the landfill directly. If they took them to one of the other waste processors, they would just the processor would just charge them more and then take it to the landfill anyway. Under this scheme, it starts to make more sense that they can actually process the material and still make money on it, the waste industry, right? I'm certain once we start to see, those roofers haul all of their asphalt shingles to one of the processors like a Milner or DBL, they're actually going to start to actually shred that material and work out something with like an asphalt company to actually have that material placed in asphalt and used for production of new asphalt. It's just not worth the hassle to do right now. But and that's just an example, but I think there's a lot of the waste stream that if we give an incentive for industry to be profitable to manage another way, that's what they're really good at. So they'll figure out a way to get it out of the garbage.
Thank you. And then just a comment, I'm guessing if the industry makes $500,000 immediately by doing this, then that is our lost tipping fee revenue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're giving up, you are giving up something. And then, the follow-up question, well, then how do we replace that? Because we still need those funds to operate. Well, it's taxation, right? Like, there's a cost, right? But you're not, so even if that's a higher taxation, right? Like I said, diversion costs more than disposal. If diversion is important in your community, need to build a system for diversion to happen. So you could, as local government, you could provide all of those services directly. But in the case of the RDN, they're never going to have more than a landfill and a transfer station. They're not going to provide all the kinds of services. If we can leverage all of the industry to provide better services, the community gets better services around diversion, more convenience, and gets the benefit of a better economy, because all of that industry pays taxes to the local government, right? So they all contributed. So you increase your tax base by increasing your the businesses in your community, and you provide more jobs. But again, if you want cheap, landfill it. If you want, if diversion's important and we want to get to in a circular economy, we need to build a system. There needs to be a cost. And this is a way to actually transfer those costs where we get better benefit and we get far better efficiency, lower cost systems if we can leverage industry to provide those services rather than trying to do it directly. Or at least that's my perspective.
All right, thanks, Larry. And Vivian, looks like you wanted to add a comment there. So we'll just get your mic, and then I see Director Wells is online, so we'll get him next.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think just further to that comment, we, as part of the October roundtable exercise, we'll be providing a bit more in-depth cost analysis. We'll take into consideration the full cost of landfilling disposal, the potential, the reduction in the airspace via the improved diversion and the expanding the life of the landfill, and the consideration of deferring or hopefully elongating the life of that landfill and the construction of potential future cells will all be taken into account to be able to demonstrate that the full cost analysis.
Okay, thanks very much. And we'll go to you now, Director Wells.
Thanks very much, Chair. I really appreciate those questions. I some of the very same questions that were just asked, so I really appreciate that. And I guess the kind of following along that, looking at the impacts that it could potentially have to our revenue source, as well as obviously the real goal is that reduction. Just on the comparison, since we're looking at RDN down in Nanaimo or CRD down in Victoria, how, if these numbers are kind of transposed directly, or like I kind of get the feeling that there's a bit of wiggle room where we could adjust things as we want, but I just didn't know how much these are really focused on what our the Comox Strathcona waste management numbers are right now, in comparison to, say, Nanaimo or Victoria, if that makes sense.
No, total sense, and it's a good question. I took what my experience with the RDN and what RDN costs were and tried to extrapolate them to match kind of size of community, amount of waste, those sorts of things. So I think in terms of ballpark costs, I think they're sound, but really to get more a finer point on these, you'd have to do more work. Like, this is really more concept. Are you interested in the concept or not? And here's about what it costs. If you're interested in the concept and you delve into the detail a little bit more, I think you could flesh out and get these costs firmed up a bit. So there's definitely some flexibility or room to move in these.
And could I ask a subsequent?
Go ahead.
Just on the slide that's up, I had a couple because or maybe just one, and it's just kind of the way it's laid out. Because there's those footnotes, just confirming that the startup cost would actually be 80,000 times 3 for the 3 years, so that'd actually be 240,000. And then the annual, would that start year 1? So your first 3 years would actually be 80 plus 50, and then after 3 years, it would reduce down to just 50 a year?
No, it would be reduced down to 50 after the first 3 years. There's quite a bit of work to actually set the system up. Once it's in place, it shouldn't be a significant burden, right? The license, for any new license, it's really easy to process. So an annual renewal of a license is really simple. But it's building the system, and there's a lot of work to do with the build and communicate with the community on it. So 3 years, 80,000, then the cost could drop to about 50,000.
Okay.
I just wanted to back up on your earlier comment. There is with the landfill has some people consider an asset, some a liability. I see that we're going to need disposal for the future. So I think where we can protect that asset, I consider it an asset, and I believe that airspace has value. So, you know, as you increase your diversion, you reduce the need of land, you know, the needs of the landfill annually. The landfill lasts longer because the capital replacement for that landfill at end of life, it will be huge. So, you know, it's sorting out all of those pieces. And Vivian's aware of it. The RDN did a solid waste asset management plan that detailed all of these costs out for the next, well, till the time of landfill closure and sometime in mid 2045 or whatever, which incorporates kind of all of the landfill costs, reduce revenue, and the cost of all of the other programs to make sure that, you know, as well as tax increases and the whole bit, to make sure that the program could be funded for the next 30 years or so, even in light of the reduction in the loss of the revenue from the reduction in the hauler revenue.
Okay, and then I guess just my apologies, just getting back to that startup cost of 80,000. Would the expectation be that there's the startup cost would begin, but you know, you're saying it's somewhat complicated, so it might take a year or two till it's fully implemented or even starts to get implemented?
So the first step would be to include it in your solid waste management plan, and that's to include the concept. That's pretty easy, and I didn't really include the cost for that. I saw that as, you know, your overall planning exercise. Once if you've chose to adopt it, that's would be year one when the 80,000 would start, and that's really about creating. It's quite a complicated bylaw. It's kind of easy in system, but it's quite a complicated bylaw. So it's really setting up the bylaw, working with the province to get approval, and like I say, it's, you know, it was 2018 till now, so a 6-year process for Nanaimo. I suspect if somebody did similar, it would be much shorter. I'm thinking, you know, a couple or 2 to 3 years. And it's also, the RDN did extensive consultation with not just the industry, but with the community on this. And it was through not just the plan, but even after, and developing all the bylaws and everything, that, you know, it takes a fair bit of staff time. And then you need to build a system for intake of applications, for intake of the disposal levy. So to put all of those pieces in place, it takes resources.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Larry, again, thanks it's been quite a marathon. So I talked about taking a break, but I see that lunch is there. So I'm wondering if we want to just see if we can power through these last few items, then take a lunch break and then move to the in-camera. So if everyone's up for that, we'll try and just move through the next few items efficiently. So anyway, thanks again for the multiple reports, Larry, and we'll move on to our next item, which is an Indigenous Relations update. Oh, sorry, we had this item is for receipt, so can anyone oppose to receipt? Perfect, and that passes. And then on to item 2, Indigenous Relations. I'll pass it to our CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So when the agenda was published, we did intend on having a written report attached to this particular item, and that's in part in response to a board request, but also to update the board on the First Nations engagement as related to the solid waste management plan review. That report obviously is not on the agenda. We do intend to bring that to you at our next board meeting. But in the meantime, Sarah Willie is able to introduce this topic. We've got a very brief presentation just to bring the board up to speed. And Asley Millwood from the Strathcona Regional District, who we are very fortunate to be working with, will also, I think, share in that presentation. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks very much through the CAO to the chair. And yeah, apologies, and look forward to you being able to read the full report and take that all in. This is that fun game. There we go. So just we'll run through the process that we've taken to date with the First Nations communities, and then highlight for you some of the great work that we've been doing in the relationship building. So the requirement for consultation, as I think you would expect, is certainly written into the solid waste management planning guide, and does ask that there is adequate public review and consultation during the development of the plan. That particular document was drafted before the changes in legislation that have come forward federally and provincially, in terms of engagement with First Nations. So, I would say it's probably not as robust written in the solid waste management plan guide as I think we hold ourselves accountable to now. So we do look to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act that the province has come through with. And we're looking for that meaningful engagement, and it's certainly more important today than it was 10 years ago. Maybe not more important, but there's more expectation and a higher expectation that's been put on us than what was undertaken in our last plan. So we're looking to achieve that. We're also reviewing, what other jurisdictions have done, and making sure that we're cognizant of the efforts that they've put forward, and again, sort of meeting or exceeding those expectations. I think one of the major emphasis that we're looking at is collaborative, and that it's meeting them where they're at, and finding out, what their priorities are. It's certainly a challenge for the nations. They have a lot of different aspects of their communities and other local governments that may impact their communities they're being asked of and to comment on. And so we do appreciate that this may not fall on the highest at the top of their list. And so, wherever they can meet us, we're glad that they participate and have those conversations with us. So walking through the process, excuse me, we did look through the provincial database, and we went across our entire service area. So while our services are limited really to Vancouver Island as well as our Gulf Islands, we don't actually have any services on the lower mainland or on the mainland portion of our service area. We did include that within our search. There's a limitation to the search parameters, and so we did 35 search areas, an example here, and then what will pop out are each of the nations that have an interest in that area. That resulted in 46 First Nations treaty associations and tribal councils that were identified. We would say that some of those nations were, to us at least, fairly clearly not within our area, like Lillooet Nation. And so, in our response to them, we did indicate that, perhaps this was not on their radar so that they would understand why it was that we were approaching them. From that list of 46, what we looked at was which nations are determined as having inhabited communities in their traditional or non-traditional territories that generate waste and recycling that's directed through our CSWM facilities. So this is a map showing each of the nations as well as sort of the adjacent or relevant Comox Strathcona waste management facilities. And really each of these nations do rely on us for their waste services, maybe not directly from their home, but that's comparable to what's occurring for residents within municipalities as well. So there's definitely some self-hauling that occurs, but there is some organized waste management within these communities as well. In advance of our consultation back in 2022, we undertook a community profile for each of these nations and researched their culture, their history, language, the governance, what their administration, what their housing situation is like. How many on reserve versus off reserve? Are they looking at redeveloping, expansion, their population, as well as their treaty status? And reached out to learn about what solid waste services they had in place currently. So that I think was a really good learning experience and really helped for us to familiarize ourselves with some of the challenges that these nations are taking on, not just within solid waste context. So each of those nations there have been engaged through this process and continue to be, all at different levels, again, meeting them where they're at. So in terms of a summary of formal outreach, we have approached each of them of the 46 nations with an introduction to the solid waste management process and also an offer of continued conversation and offer of minutes. For the core nations, we offered a meeting with government to government if so requested. We did receive 2 nations and we're able to have face-to-face meetings with 2 of those 10 nations, and we continue to pursue those where available. For the remaining 36 nations and treaty associations, there were 2 that identified that they would like to have continued conversation with us, and that's Toquat and Tla'amin. Tla'amin's, of course, on that area, and Toquat's on the west coast, sort of south of our area. So yeah, we continue to add them to our list of correspondence and keep them up to date on our solid waste management plan process. Subsequent to that, for the core nations, we sent out a letter advising them of the opportunity to join the Regional Solid Waste Advisory Council. And we emphasized that this didn't need to be a member of staff or a member of the council or the elected officials, that this could be just an engaged member of the community, could be a youth member, could be anyone who is really interested in that topic. We offer, as we do with all of our advisory members, to compensate them for travel, as well as to compensate them for their time and participation. So all public members are compensated to participate in advisory at $125 per meeting. To date, we've had participation from Muchalat Uchalat Nation at a few of our meetings, and we're grateful that they've made that effort. But we continue to let the nations know that that offer stands. In February, we sent out a progress to date notification, as well as sent out some minutes for them and directed them to our Engage page, where we continue to update the minutes. So those are available publicly as well. And that's board minutes and our SWAC minutes. And then in October, we reached out with goals and guiding principles and allowed for the nations to provide their input on that. I will say as well, I skipped over in November the survey. So we did support the nations by providing PDFs of the survey for their community to put up, PDFs of a poster, as well as some social media engagement. So we did receive a response from 9 out of the 10 communities in that survey, which was great. And then I'm just going to pass it off to Esley to speak to some of the relationship building.
Good afternoon, directors. My name is Esley Millwood. I'm the First Nations liaison at the Strathcona Regional District. I work with the CSWM 1 day a week to help with relationship building and outreach. I'm just going to do a high-level touch on a few of the nations that we've been building relationships. I'll start with Hamalco because there is some context matters. So like the SRD, there are very knowledgeable staff that have strong relationships with the nations. And so I asked them to invite me to events, and I like to, when they go into events, to ride on their coattails, I guess, and have that opportunity to meet with people in the nation. So I believe it's the community services coordinator, Stephanie
Valdell.
Stephanie Valdell. Yes, she's brought me into Hamalco for Earth Day, where we had a community champion who was an educator and applied for a grant, and they invited us in to do a community cleanup. And they did educational demonstration. So that was a piece that stemmed from those outreach and awareness letters that came out. So that's where maybe there'll be more questions and can you do this, even if it's not written in the letter. So another nation that we're very happy that we're beginning to build a relationship with is the Clawitzes. Their community is not completed and they don't have folks moving in. But through other engagements through the SRD, we were able to have an opportunity to get an invite to go out with the director of the region there and our CAO and some other staff in engineering. Miss Willie as well came. So we were able to see how the community is coming along and to start to build trust and a relationship with the Clawitzes. So when solid waste does come to mind, hopefully we will be at the top of their mind when it comes to questions regarding that and helping them fulfill their goals. And backing up a bit, in last summer, we went out to the Northern Regional Games and the CSWM was there. I supported Miss Valdell with diversion, composting, recyclables, and the SRD was able to support driving folks from community and in between the communities. And from that, I was able to get an understanding of the community's attitudes or beliefs or what their concerns are. And I started hearing some things about the landfill is going to be closing. What does that look like? So I saw that as an opportunity and backing up, it's important that the nations understand that I have access to these very knowledgeable staff at these regional districts because that is my job as a liaison. So it's okay, when I'm out there in the community with these very knowledgeable staff, perhaps then the nations will say, as a lead, can you ask if this is possible? What's happening here? Can you get a key? Like that's my job is gumshoe marketing ear to the ground. So from that was positive in building relationships. Then we had some Zabalas landfill closure meetings. And from that, we had some of the northern Nuu-chah-nulth nations, including Cayucit, Nuchatlet, Zabalas, and the village of Zabalas. So we've applied for some C2C funding to have a dialogue about what that looks like, the closure of the Zabalas landfill, and to look at opportunities and the concerns and how the nation can participate in that. And moving back to DRIPA, it's important that the nations have a very predictable relationship with governments. So in having that C2C and having all of that transparent on the table about what the Zabalas landfill closure looks like and possibly the transfer station that's going in, that increases that predictable relationship. So we're quite happy that we've applied for a grant for that, and we're slowly beginning planning for that in the fall. And well, there's more to talk about, but if there's any questions, thank you.
Yeah, just want to thank Ashley for all that great work and Stephanie Valdell, certainly a big part of that team. She's on the ground and in these communities and supporting those. So it really helps us, as CSWM, CVRD located staff to have that connection to the SRD. And it's really benefited us to have Ashley as part of our team. So we're really grateful.
Great. Thanks for the report, Aslia and Sarah. And if there are any questions online. Okay. Thanks very much and look forward to the follow-up report, and just great to see this collaboration between staff in both regional districts. So thank you both. There's no motion for receipt on this, so we'll move next on to item number 3. This is regarding facilities on Quadra Island, and I will pass this over to our CAO.
Thanks. And Sarah Willie will also take this staff report. So Sarah, we'll just go straight over to you.
Thank you through the CAO to the chair. So we wanted to bring forward a resolution that was passed at the Strathcona Regional District Board. And it was a little bit unusual. We don't get a lot of these. So It came over and we thought this was the best way to bring it forward, was to bring it forward to the board in the form of a staff report and get direction from our CSWM board as to how you'd like us to proceed. So there's some work that's being undertaken by the Strathcona Regional District engineering staff, Asley's involved as well, looking at Quadra Island and the potential for a curbside collection service. And so there's staff reports that are related to that issue that are going through the SRD board. And this was part of that conversation, that overall waste management conversation. So as this board is aware, we're looking at constructing a recycling facility, and the current facility on Quadra is unstaffed bins at the end of a road for mixed recycling, and we pay for the transportation of that recycling, and we pay for the processing of that recycling. It's not under the Recycle BC program. We have received approval from Recycle BC to build that depot and have the material collected there funded through them. So that will alleviate the cost of processing and transportation from the CSWM. Part of that assessment that was done a number of years ago, and we've been moving forward with obtaining a lease to that land, which was time consuming, and now we're moving forward with construction there. So the current layout does not plan for a waste transfer station, but there's understanding that that's a possibility that the community may want. So we are going to be undertaking consultation in July 19th on Quadra to hear from residents. We did have 22 residents participate in the survey earlier this year, looking at their level of not this year, earlier in the solid waste management plan process. And that was looking at their level of satisfaction with their waste management services. Generally on the lower side when it comes to garbage management, happier with yard waste, and sort of middle of the ground with recycling. So we do see, when we evaluate the waste tonnage, about 50% of residents in 2022 were participating in a paid subscription for pickup for garbage with a hauler, and about 50% of the tonnage was self-hauled over to the waste management center in Campbell River. And there's been a shift there, and that was kind of one of the main impetus for this resolution, I believe, in that waste management changed from a per bag situation to a subscription where you needed to pay per month, and that increased the cost substantially for residents there. So, as such, many have looked for alternative options and have, either shifted to self-haul themselves, or there's some small companies that are operating pickup truck services. But I believe the SRD was looking for sort of a more comprehensive approach. So I hope that provides some context and relevance to the resolution. And we do have a recommendation, that we are looking at this as part of our holistic accessibility question. We have Hornby and Denman, which are island communities that self-fund their solid waste services primarily. And then we have Cortez that's funded through the CSWM 391 function. And Quadra is currently, planned to be funded through 391 function and not self-funded. So, how that all moves forward is part of that conversation, and whether, a waste transfer station fits in and how that would be funded would be part of that conversation too. Happy to answer questions.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And I realized I forgot to get a motion for receipt, so I get a mover and seconder. Kerr and Mawhinney. Perfect. I don't see any questions online or in the room. Director Mawhinney has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. And I'm really grateful to the SRD board for supporting this motion and bringing it and for it to be here today. And thank you, Sarah, for so eloquently describing the situation that Quadra Island residents find themselves facing right now. I wanted to let this board and that the SRD has also been involved in a feasibility study for solid waste on the outer Discovery Islands. And one of the results was a recommendation for advocating for a solid waste transfer station on Quadra for those residents as well, because it really identified that other service options are relatively costly. And this is also supported by conversations that I've had with outer island residents as well. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned at the beginning that there's going to be some, July 19th is a community engagement session, and that's, just under a month away. So I'm really excited to learn the outcomes of that. And I'd also really like to support sharing that information with the community, because July is a really busy month in a tourism dependent community. So ensuring that people have lots of time to know what is happening and where it's happening. So I'm wondering if you can share when on July 19th the engagement is happening and where that will be taking place.
Yeah, thank you. We're definitely going to utilize your vast network in terms of helping to get the work out, and ICANN, of course, is a great partner that we have on Quadra as well, that will help. We do acknowledge summer is a challenging time. This process is long, so there will be more opportunities as well. This won't be the only one. But July 19th, we're looking at an afternoon, like 3 to 5 p.m. And the location we're still looking at, but we're happy to chat with you afterwards if you have suggestions. We have some ideas, but you may have a preference indoor versus outdoor, et cetera. So yeah, when we can get those materials available as soon as possible to get the word out.
Okay, thank you. And I just had one more quick question, and that is that you mentioned that there were transfer stations on Cortez and Hornby. I was under the understanding that there may also be transfer stations in Sayward and Gold River, and that they are also planned for both Sabalis and Tassis as those landfills are attenuated. So I guess I'm curious, it seems like quite a network of transfer stations, and do they have a variety of funding models, or the ones that are in municipalities, are they funded through the CSWM or self-funded?
Yeah, so starting from the south, Hornby has a waste transfer station, so it's 2 ferries away. Denman does not. Hornby's operations are funded through a separate function so not funded by the CSWM. The residents of Hornby are paying for that. We pay for the waste transfer from that location. And residents pay for the tipping fees. So we're paying to transfer the waste, not the tipping fees. Denman, as I mentioned, does not have a waste transfer facility. The curbside collection provider that's there brings the waste to the Comox Valley Waste Management Center in their collection truck. In Gold River, the landfill there stopped accepting municipal solid waste a number of years ago. And at that time, there was a transfer station established for the materials that are collected within the community. So only inert material are directed to the landfill there. That waste transfer station is operated by the village under a contract with us. But again, we pay for the transfer of the waste. They pay for the tipping fees. So that's kind of the standard under the unified transportation model that was part of the last solid waste management plan, is that for communities that are, having to move their waste into our consolidated disposal locations, that the transfer of the waste would be funded. For Tassis and Sabalis, yes, waste transfer stations are planned to replace the landfills in those communities. Sayward does not have a waste transfer facility. So similarly, the collector that the SRD contracts, so that's an SRD service. That contractor delivers the waste directly to the Campbell River Waste Management Center. And they only pick up garbage. They do not pick up recyclables. So we have a recycling depot in Sayward that the CSWM funds. For Cortez, again, with 2 ferries, I also believe in that Hornby and Cortez previously had small landfills. And so with the closure of those small landfills, waste transfer stations were established. Cortez, when it was established, was funded by CSWM and continues to be so. So the operations of that facility are funded by CSWM as well as the waste transfer. But there are SRD services for the curbside collection of waste and recyclables on Cortez. And there is an SRD service that funds the disposal of the waste leaving Cortez. So it certainly is a complex network. And then we have other places, with recycling depots only as well, like Oyster River. And yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you, Sarah. That was impressive off the top of your head to be able to detail all of those models. So just impressed as always. Thank you. So we have a receipt on the table. Anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, and there is recommendation. Oh, moved and seconded. Great. Thank you very much. Anyone opposed to the recommendation? Seeing none. So there's one last item for receipt. That's the resolution status report. Okay, moved and seconded. Are there any questions on that? People eager for lunch. Okay, thanks very much. Anyone opposed to receipt? Perfect. Okay, so we're going to adjourn and just we'll try to get back to our seats by just after 12:30. So about 20 minutes or so for lunch, and then we'll dive into the in-camera.